Saints Row is a reboot of the much beloved Saints Row game franchise that took players on larger-than-life adventures, twists, and turns. This reboot aimed to remove the wackier and weirder elements that became the cornerstone of the Saints franchise. This decision immediately stirred controversy amongst fans who either loved or loathed the decision. So let's examine whether this more serious take on the Saints resulted in a superior product as we review Saints Row. For full transparency, the footage you'll be seeing in this review was recorded on my computer with the graphical setting set to ultra. The gameplay is taken while I was primarily using a mouse and keyboard, but I did use a controller for a few different missions just to get a better feel for the different gameplay styles one can expect. All in all, I played a total of around 7 hours in order to film this review. So let's get started. Jump to the timestamps on screen now if there are any specific topics that pique your interest. Arguably the most important feature of any game is the gameplay. Players can ignore bad stories by simply skipping cinematics, but if the gameplay is truly horrible, it'll take a miracle to save the game. While the overall presentation and visuals still retain similarities to earlier Saints Row games, I feel the developers took quite a bit of inspiration from third-person shooter Watch Dogs 2, and I will bring this up again during the topic of story. While navigating the world feels quite similar to games of the past, cars handle well, using your phone to interact with the world is pulled from previous games, and even takedowns and finishes feel similar. There is a massive change to gunplay that ultimately affects the gameplay as a whole. The guns of Saints Row are beyond inaccurate. Even enemies a few feet ahead of the player can survive an entire clip of ammunition being blown their way simply because of the spread of bullets. To counter this, the game actually implements an aim assist system, which while definitely helps console players and controller users, feels almost illegal to use with a mouse and keyboard. This aim assist assures that your first few shots will always hit the intended target or even a nearby enemy you weren't aiming to attack. This reliance on a mechanic that is usually used to assist controller users with aiming down the sights and shooters feels almost required even for a keyboard and mouse user. The guns' inaccuracies and general clunkiness definitely creates a major difference between this reboot and the Saints Row games of old, which thrived off of responsive and accurate gunplay. To sum up the gunplay, this is probably the weakest element of the game for me. I found myself fighting more with my own gun than the enemy's guns. When I didn't have a lock or assistance from the inbuilt aiming assistance system, enemies felt like they were dodging every shot just by standing still. But when the lock-in takes place, the challenge disappears entirely, as every shot could be a headshot or a one-hit kill from a more powerful gun. As mentioned earlier, traveling around the vehicles feels very similar to Saints Row games of the past, which is great. The vehicles in particular of Saints Row the 3rd and 4 were fast, yet agile, and incredibly responsive. The vehicles in this reboot feel much the same, with the biggest difference being the implementation of the handbrake and how drifting feels as a response. Drifting has always been a faster way and simply a cooler way of getting around tight corners. But the Saints reboot treats its drifting as a sort of boost, similar to that of Mario Kart, where no speed is actually lost, and you can continue driving at full speed after pulling off a 90-degree turn. This does allow for much quicker travel times and the feeling of being placed right inside a Fast and the Furious movie, but it does feel a little bit more arcadey at times. Customization is the highlight of this Saints Row game. From fully customizing your character's look, including their gender, race, and body type, to their wardrobe, as well as in-depth vehicle customization and an overhauled weapon customization system, ensures that your protagonist will look and feel completely different to every other player out there. The map itself is a massive sandbox that players can explore and definitely offers a much more grounded locale than games before. But I cannot help but feel a distinct influence from the map of Grand Theft Auto 5, especially with the inclusion of the more arid regions. The game offers many missions across the maps for players to participate in, from assassination contracts to transportation missions, influencer campaigns, and so much more. There is always something for players to do. Even simply driving around the map, exploring and creating chaos can be a lot of fun. The diverse landscape allows for a variety of different experiences and over-the-top set pieces. This ultimately serves as an impressive backdrop to the origin story for the Saints. The latest console generation has had plenty of games that act as showcases to powerful graphical engines and push not only consoles but even the most powerful computers to their extremes. We are long past the days of "but can it run" crisis, and the idea of good graphics equals good game is now firmly in the past. But it must be stated that the graphics displayed in Saints Row do leave a bit to be desired. When signing into the game for the first time, I was actually shocked to see how similar the graphics from this reboot seem to Saints Row the 3rd and 4. While there of course have been improvements since the last game was released 9 years ago, its improvements are quite minimal. Yes, we can explore a much more diverse and detailed world with a larger variety in enemy type designs and NPCs, but the look of these characters can only be described as average when compared to other games released this year, and especially when compared to games from almost a decade ago. One of my favorite elements of the game, however, is the in-game cutscenes. These cinematics take place in-game and do a great job of blending gameplay and cutscenes. However, pesky loading screens are present before and after each cinematic, which does remove immersion and breaks what could have been smooth transitions from gameplay to cinematics. I believe it is worth stating that while playing the game, I was never truly distracted by the graphics and simply believed it helped connect this game to the Saints Row franchise, but my wife walked in during my 4th hour of gameplay simply to say, "Why does this look like Sims 4? Continuing on from that, she found the character models incredibly smooth and seemingly lacked texture. So if first impressions make or break your immersion in a game as a whole, then be prepared when starting up Saints Row for the first time. The render distance can also be a bit of a problem, especially when traveling in cars at higher speeds. While the environment renders in the distance and gives the player fair warning, there are moments of surprises in regards to NPCs and vehicles who render into the game at last second, which can lead to some crashes or collisions that feel unfair. This short render distance also rears its head during story missions, as at times enemy NPCs may spawn right in front of you, absolutely destroying your immersion in the game. The story is where most of the weird and wacky elements of previous games were dropped. We have lost the incredibly charismatic characters from Saints Row's past, like Johnny Gat, Shaundy, and my personal favorites Oleg. Instead, we are joined by Kevin, Eli, and Nina, characters whose personalities run skin deep and all feel like carbon copies of characters found in other game franchises. This is where my earlier point of comparisons between Saints Row and Watch Dogs comes into play. In both games, the core characters surrounding the player feel almost identical, and you could swap out characters from either game and the impact would be minimal. Unrelated to the story, but still in line with Watch Dog influences, you can't possibly tell me that this gang doesn't seem to be lifted directly from the Watch Dogs universe. But the story follows the player's custom character, the boss, and the aforementioned characters as they try to pay rent. This idea of paying rent pushes forward the narrative throughout the introductory segment of the game. Here we get plenty of time to learn more about Kevin, Eli, and Nina and their relationships to rival gangs. After a massive confrontation, the core cast of characters decide to start their own gang, and the rest of the game is building up the base of the Saints, beating back rival gangs, and building side hustles to get additional income and political power. While the idea of building the gang up is explored in almost every single Saints Row game before this, Saints Row 2022 struggles to launch the game in a meaningful way and make it engaging. I have brought up the Saints Row games from the past, and it felt almost unavoidable comparing this 2022 reboot to the games that were released almost a decade ago. When Saints Row the 3rd was released, it was a major event. The marketing campaign and over-the-top trailer ensured that every gamer knew that this game was going to be something big. But what if my nostalgia was getting in the way? What if I was looking at the past through rose-tinted glasses? To battle this, I actually launched my copy for Saints Row the 3rd, as from a gameplay and story point of view, I felt it was the most similar to the 2022 reboot. For those asking why not compare it to the original Saints Row, as both launched their respective worlds, I would just like to remind everyone that Saints Row was released in 2006. Comparing that to a 2022 release just isn't a fair comparison, although I know many will continue to make this comparison in the future. But after a few hours of Saints Row 3, I realized that there were many similarities and differences between the two different games. Saints Row 3 is full over-the-top action, but is matched with over-the-top characters and enemies. All this is brought together with a combat system that is equally over-the-top and at times a little more clunky than I remember, but for the most part is responsive and allows the player full control of what they want to accomplish. Gameplay from the reboot suffers from trying too hard to lose the wacky and weirder elements, yet still tries to achieve the same level of chaos and action set pieces. There was this weird tonal balance that never seems to match up. The player is expected to take the game, its set pieces, and its characters seriously, yet the protagonist often finds themselves in completely wacky and over-the-top situations, such as shooting goons from atop a jet that you have tied to a rock formation. This constant jump between grounded and cartoonish offers up some serious whiplash for the player. The biggest issue is that the game is trying to set itself apart from the wacky Saints Row games that came before and embrace a serious tone, yet keep the core idea of what a Saints Row game is, which is ultimately an over-the-top game about gangs fighting each other. It's this serious conflict and identity that stops this reboot from truly shining. In summary, Saints Row 2022 is a bold attempt at reviving a franchise that went out with a whimper after the release of Agents of Mayhem. And there's plenty to like about it. A large diverse map, customization to characters, cars, weapons and homesteads, fast and exciting gameplay sequences, responsive and powerful vehicles, but all paired up with a rebooted cast of characters that feels both shallower than the previous outings and less memorable. Combat shows an unfortunate drop in quality from previous outings, which again unfortunately impacts the enjoyment of the game as a whole. So if you are a fan of Saints Row, of open world exploration and third-person shooters, I would recommend that you give Saints Row a shot. There are many positives to look forward to in this game, but check your expectations before launching the game for the first time. If you enjoyed this review or found it in any way helpful, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more content just like this.